Welcome to the Dennis Manoloff Show, part of the Press Play Podcast Network. This is Season 1, Episode 10. I am pleased to welcome a very special guest who will be the main man on today's episode, Phil Bova, longtime friend, longtime NCAA referee, author, coach, legend in Northeast Ohio. So it's really a privilege and an honor for me to be speaking with Bovalicious, I call him. So, Bo, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure being with you tonight, Dennis.
You got it, Bo. Let's just start out with the reason you are talking to me in this particular episode. Throwing Back the Chair, your book, just a phenomenal book, memoir essentially of your days as a referee. Tell the listenership what prompted you to write the book and, when it was first published and, give us a big book signing coming up.
Okay, I sure will. Thank you, Dennis. I was fortunate to work college basketball at the NCAA, Dennis, for 44 years and 30 years in the Big Ten. And I was fortunate to meet some great players, Hall of Fame players, Hall of Fame coaches, and some great, fabulous games throughout those careers. Many times I'd come home and share these stories with my son and my two daughters and their friends. And there was a young man by the name of Nino Frostino, who happens to be my author. And he says, Mr. Bove, you've got to sit down with me and we've got to put this on paper. We've got to share with the people across the country, in the Big Ten country, all the great things that happened to you. So he convinced me to do it, Dennis, and I did it. And I'm just thrilled that we were able to, as you mentioned earlier, share these memoirs, not only with my family, but with the great people who love college basketball and high school basketball throughout the country, because it's just a lot of fun in the book. Not only the Bobby Knight story, which is the name of the book, of course, Throwing Back the Chair, that's just a small part of it. But there's an awful lot of great history in here that I'd like to share with the readers this evening.
And Phil, what's your next biggest, and when was it published first, and when is your next biggest book signing?
It was published last year, Dennis, but we had so many wonderful book signings. People throughout Northeastern Ohio, the media, the newspaper, everyone just rallied so nicely around it. I was just overwhelmed, Nino and I. And of course, with the pandemic, things kind of subsided a little bit. Now it's starting to pick up. So our next book signing, and we're really excited about it, will be out at beautiful Camp Run Amok. And that is in Marblehead, Ohio. And it's in Lakeside Marblehead. It's right by Lake Erie. It's just a great place to eat, a great social place for Northeastern Ohio people who love Lake Erie and the islands. And we're going to have a special treat for all our followers of college basketball. And that will be June 12th, Dennis, at noon. That's a great time. And we're going to be hosted by Pat and Michelle Teresi. They are the proprietors of Camp Run Amok, and we're going to have a great turnout. They're doing a great job of promoting it, but people just love basketball. People get excited about the World Series. People get excited about the NCAA basketball tournament. And I was, very fortunate to be an integral part of that for 20 of my 30 years in the Big Ten. So we're going to share all those wonderful stories and magical moments.
And Bo, before we get into, the inspiration behind the title, as you mentioned, the chair game involving Bobby Knight and the Hoosiers playing host to the Purdue Boilermakers, quickly let those who don't know your legend, let them know about where you were born and raised, how many sports you played growing up, because you were a big name coming up through the ranks even before you were an NCAA referee.
Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you, Dennis. I was fortunate to play basketball, football, and baseball at Cleveland West High School. Now, that was in the West Senate. And Cleveland school systems were really so well respected as it is now. But and had some great athletes, but we had some great competition back there I was fortunate to play in the 60s, the early 60s, East Senate, West Senate. We had the charity game for football. We had the championship for Senate basketball and big time baseball in this area. The Plain Dealer Sports League covered our high school and amateur baseball. I was fortunate to play with Wenham Truckers throughout after my high school career, and before I was able to sign with the Indians and the Angels. I played amateur baseball with the Wenham Truckers. We had some fabulous players, one of them being Steve Stone. Steve Stone pitched for us and wound up winning the Cy Young Award. Who knew that would happen, But we had some great athletes, and I was fortunate to have great players surrounding me. But most importantly, Dennis, I was blessed to have three great coaches in high school, and they really kind of laid the groundwork for me, particularly in basketball and baseball. And as we're talking about a little bit later on, about the camps that I was able to provide for high school and junior high players in the area, the Phil Bova baseball school that we were fortunate to have for 45 years, and then my NCAA Bova referees camp that we had for 25 years, that we brought all kinds of officials across the country, brought them in for a week and trained them and prepared them. And that whole story's in Throwing Back the Chair, along with some great surprise coaches, one of them being Tom Izzo, one of them being Bobby Knight, and so on. But to answer your question, I was very fortunate to play those three sports in a great conference in a great school system, Cleveland, Ohio.
All right, both fast forward to February 23rd, 1985. It's the Indiana Hoosiers playing host to the Purdue Boilermakers. High drama, packed house. I assume, I never bothered to check the attendance, but I assume it was packed house at Assembly Hall. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you've got the game with two other officials, and let me just say, all heck breaks loose. I'll let you take it from there.
To say the least, Dennis. Wait, to say the least. February 23rd, 1985, 17,000 people, nationally televised game between nationally ranked Purdue Boilermakers and the Indiana Hoosiers. And that ball game, as you said, was at Bloomington, and it was late in the year, and both teams were ranked. And I have to share this with you before we go. I'm not going to go in the entire story, just tease them a little bit, because that's in the book, and it really goes into great detail as to what happened. But that was my daughter. I have three beautiful children, nine grandchildren, my two daughters and a son. But on February 23rd is my daughter's birthday, and she was 16 at that time. And my wife says, "What are you doing refereeing a basketball game in Bloomington, Indiana, and have all those crazy things happen to you when you should have been home at our birthday party?" So that's always been an ongoing joke. But every game that we referee in the Big Ten particularly, they have what we call a pregame. And in this pregame, Dennis, we're there an hour and a half. If the game's at 7:30, we're in the arena at 6. Games at 3, we're there, at 1:30. We have to be in the arena, in our locker room, and we go through a checklist of things that might happen throughout the game. And if it happens, what are we going to do about it? And certain crazy things can happen. We go through the coaches, we go through the players, the type of personalities, how we're going to handle if this and that happens. Well, who on that checklist, we never saw a chair being thrown across the floor, and how do you handle that? So it was quite an experience, to say the least. But there were several. The ball did not go in the basket for Indiana that first or 6-7 minutes of the ball game. There was a cap on the basket, and no matter what we called, it was wrong. And Coach Knight was all fired up, and we had successive foul calls against Indiana, like probably 3 or 4 in a row, and it was just the way it turned out. And each of those led to emotion after emotion. And of course, now the first technical foul comes up, where there was an exchange between Coach Knight and my brother official. And then there was a throw in. And if you go to YouTube, you could see the entire breakdown But the breakdown in the book is hilarious as to what took place. And then, of course, the chair comes out on the second technical foul. And needless to say, Dennis, we were just awed. All three of us immediately had the technical foul sign. And it was kind of like, did this really happen? And fortunately for Coach Knight, and he's a great guy, he's a great coach, and we'll share some things that have just happened here in the last year or so for both of us. It was very pleasant to say the least. But the chair is thrown across the floor, and fortunately for Coach Knight, it stopped 5 feet from the handicap section, of which 8 wheelchairs were there, Dennis. Now, God forbid if that chair happens to hit one of those wheelchairs, we got a monumental problem. But fortunately, it did not. And the place turned into an uproar. You could just imagine the chaos that we as 3 officials had gone under. Now, what are you going to do? You have to get control of the game. And that's where our administrative duties really kicked in. And I really thought we did a good job because we came very close to canceling that ball game.
Yeah, and Bo, before you
left the floor, it would have been over with.
Yeah, before you continue with that, Steve Reed was at the line and shooting the tech, and that's when Knight heaved the chair, and it just kind of flew because it was one of those lighter chairs, just kind of skipped across the court like a rock skipping across the water.
Exactly.
And Reed, instantly Steve Reed became a household name. I mean, you talk to any. Not only college basketball fan, but just an average sports fan. And you mentioned the name Steve Reed, the little point guard, the little guard from Purdue. And the first thing I think they would think of is the chair game, because he will forever be associated with that, because he was at the line when the chair went flying by. And luckily it didn't hit him or, as you said, any of the handicapped people. So the chair gets chucked. Where are you on the court at this time? And then take us through the time after the chair is thrown to the time that you got to get Knight off the court.
Right. Now he goes to try, there were 3 technical fouls called, so there were 6 free throws, and he's a 92% free throw shooter, Dennis, at this time. And now they're clapping. The Indiana people are going crazy. They're screaming and yelling. You can hardly hear yourself talk. And of course, poor Steve Reed, he winds up making 2 out of the 6. And I'm sure to this day he'll he's he'll hear about that when his name is brought up. But there was a lot of pressure on the kid. But he made 2 out of 6. But he was a great player, a great point guard, as you pointed out. And then now the chair goes across. He shoots the free throw, and now we have another technical foul, and it was just complete chaos. So I call the athletic director comes out of the stands and says, "Phil, you did not throw Coach Knight out." I says, "Sir, I did not throw him out. He threw himself out by his behavior. He just very simply, there's no way we can keep him in this ball game with that type of behavior." So he was after the one official. He was primarily after the one official because he wanted a jump ball that took place with Steve Alford to set this whole thing off, Dennis. Right at half court, he wanted a jump ball, and my brother official had called a foul on him. So therefore, that just turned everything into a nightmare. And I talked to Bob. I says, "Bob, Coach Knight, you've got to leave." He says, I'm gonna leave, but I'm gonna make sure that I'm gonna get my 2 cents in here. I said, "Well, you better leave this floor in the next couple of minutes, and we're gonna have to call this ball game." So fortunately for us, he left the floor. Now the fans are throwing quarters and nickels and dimes, and they're yelling, "Bobby, Bobby," in unison. And if you put this YouTube on, you'll hear that. And that particular day, he usually wore a sport jacket, but that particular day he wore a sweater. Now the play-by-play announcers say, "I think he's going to be leaving this arena and go play some golf because there's some real nice golf courses in the Bloomington area," to say the least. So it was chaotic, but we got the game under control. And fortunately for us, we did, because it was a tough situation. because, again, he did not want to leave the floor, and there was just pandemonium all over the place. So, and then Purdue went on to win handedly, as it turned out.
Bova, after the game, did Knight come after you guys at all? Was there anything in the locker rooms or the back hallways that went on?
No, now there was nothing like that, Dennis. But it's funny because 2 weeks later, I have him again. I have Indiana again. I guess it was Iowa, and we have a chance to talk before the game. He'll come out, and both coaches will sometimes come over to the officials, and he made no mention of the game at all, and which I thought was pretty. I thought that was pretty clever on his part. It's just like it never happened. It was part of what we had to do for those 2 hours. The thing that had happened, it was history. But I have to share with you this. With my referees camp that same summer. This happened
so
on February 20. Yes, 1985, February 23rd. I have my referees camp. I bring officials from all across the country. Now, this is a classic. And I had 6 or 7 different colleges that I would select to go and have my referees camp. And we would be in conjunction with that particular school. Now, this particular that summer in July, we were at Baldwin Wallace College. Steve Bankson was the athletic director and head basketball coach in this area. And we had the camp all prepared. 85 people attended this camp. It's 6:30 at night. It's July 5th. The place is packed. I said to Steve, I got a special surprise, because what I tried to do at every camp was I'd have the coaches, I called it a coaches quarter, where the coaches would talk to the officials and the officials would be able to talk to the coaches and dialogue and exchange different questions they may not be able to talk through the game. What do you look for in an official? How do you prepare for a crew? If we call a technical foul on you, do you hold that against us? And they talk their philosophy, we talk them to them. And so I was going to have Steve and his crew do that, but I says I have a special surprise. I didn't even tell Steve Bankson. It was a classic. So I says, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Phil Bova referees camp. You're going to have a great week, but I have a special surprise for you. How many of you people in this room, and I want you to raise your hands, think Phil Bova is full of baloney if I tell you right around that corner, I have Bob Knight is going to talk to you for the next hour? Raise your hands. They all raise their hands as this Bova is full of baloney. Ladies and gentlemen, let's have our hands together for Coach Bob Knight. Well, Dennis, when he walked around that corner at 6'6", they almost fell off the chair. Nobody knew he was coming except my brother, who picked him up at the airport. He flew in with his lovely wife, who I got a chance to see about a year ago, and I'll share that story with you. I have plenty of stories. And a lot of this is broken down in the book so nicely. So now he walks in, and they were like shocked. Well, I introduced him. They clapped, and he was supposed to talk, Dennis, for 1 hour. He talked for 3 hours. That alone is unbelievable. Okay, so now he gets going. He starts to really warm up. And by warming up, I mean the vernaculars that came out of his mouth talking about different situations was hysterical. And there's a situation that happens. A question is asked of him that is all about the chair throwing contest, or the chair throwing incident that turned into a contest. And he was what the dialogue between this person and what happened to Bobby Knight was just hysterical. And I don't want to take too much time going into that, but it's well described in the book. And I think the people will really enjoy the dialogue. And that showed a tremendous amount of respect, I thought, by Coach Knight toward me by coming in after that unbelievable incident that will be down, I believe, in the college history, annals of college basketball history for many, many years to come. That was his way of saying, hey, look, it happened. It's over. I respect you. Let's go on. And I appreciated that.
Yeah, a couple of nuggets about Robert Montgomery Knight. He's 80 years old as of this taping. He'll be 81 on October 25th. He was born in Massillon. He was an assistant coach at Cuyahoga Falls High School in 62-63 before going on to Army to be an assistant.
Right.
Of course, he played at Ohio State and then became a legendary coach. And, he's got a reputation that, is polarizing, to say the least. There are people that love him. There are people that hate him. He had the infamous temper and everything else. But, Bove, how many games do you estimate that you were referee when Knight was coach? And what was it like? And not just the chair guy. Take them all in the same basket, in the Bobby Knight basket. What was it like to referee a Bob Knight game?
That's a great question. I was fortunate to work 30 years in the Big Ten. I must have worked probably 35 to 45 to 50 games in just that league alone. And I would get each team on the average, Dennis, probably about 6 to 9 times a year. And you better be ready to referee when you walk on the floor at any Big Ten arena. It's packed. Every call is questioned. You could cut the tension with the knife, but when you walk into Indiana, there was that special preparation, that because when he walked out on the floor with just seconds before the ball would go up, it was like, St. Peter walked out on the floor. It was just, people would just idolize this guy. He could walk on water. And if he thought for 1 second that you were weak, you were dead in the water, and he would test you. But I was fortunate when I first got into the league to work with Charlie Foudy, Dennis. He was like the dean of the Big Ten officials. And I also worked with a guy by the name of Gary Muncie, outstanding referee, and I was the young referee. So they put me with a guy that Knight definitely respected. And that first 6 games, he tested me every single game that I refereed. And I was fortunately I can remember like it was yesterday. There's a coaching box, and there's 3 officials in a game now. There used to be 2 when we first started out in the Big Ten. Now there's 3, and there's 3 all across the country, and as well as in the pros. There's a lead official right underneath the basket. There's a center official opposite the benches, and then there's a trail official on the side of the benches, and all 3 officials have a responsibility. So now Knight would roam that sideline, and he would walk out of that box. Now, technically speaking, if you walk out of the box, you ask the coach, would you please get back in the box? If he doesn't, you're supposed to tee him up. Well, he would walk down, and he would challenge me almost every single time I was at the baseline. And I said to him very simply, you step out of that box one more time, it's a technical foul. He says, you don't have the guts to do it. I says, I don't. Technical foul. That broke the ice between him and I. And that was it was supposed to happen. It was I call it a silent miracle. From that point on, he says, you got guts, Bova. I says, well, coach, I appreciate that. You do what you're supposed to do, and I'll do what I'm supposed to do. We're going to get along real well. So for 30 years, we got along pretty well. And I have to share this story with you. Just before the pandemic started out last year, I was asked to have a big book signing in Columbus. Well, when I was told Bob Knight was going to be there, that made it very, very special. In fact, I was shocked. It was so good to hear that he was going to be there, because so many people had him like he was in a nursing home, for God's sake. All these rumors, and I hadn't talked to him. And I saw him 2 weeks prior to that on TV. He walked out on the floor with his son, Patrick, on the Indiana-Purdue game. And the place went crazy, as they did February 23rd, 1985. The place was rock. And he had his right arm going up and down, and Dick Vitale was over on the side. And he walked up to Dick Vitale, and Dick Vitale took off his phones, and he looked like he was going to punch him. I says, good old Bobby Knight. He still has it, buddy. So now I get this phone call. 2 days, that was on a Saturday. I get a phone call on Monday. Knight's going to be there. I told the guy, you're full of baloney. He goes, no, I'm not. He's going to be there. Will you be there? I says, you bet I will. So we drive down. You got to picture this now. You got to picture this. We haven't seen each other in 25 years. I walk in the one side of the hall. He walks in the other side of the hall. Now there's 100 chairs, red chairs, to be signed by him and I, and 950 books to be signed by him and I in 3 hours. He walks up to me. Now we're doing a podcast here, and I can't mention exactly what I'll say, so I'll just kind of sum it up. He whispered in my ear. He says, Bova, you know, and then he didn't say this exactly, but I was kind of clean it up a little bit. He says, Bova, you know you screwed me in that game. You know you did. I'll never forget. I said, let me tell you something. You got out-coached in the first half, and if you stayed around the second half, you would have got out-coached again. And then we hugged. It was great. And my son took him. I'm getting goosebumps telling you. So my son takes this picture, the four of us. Now we got tears in our eyes. This is Knight and Bova. We went to head 30 years. Now we're hugging each other. So when I give these book signings, I've got this beautiful poster of Knight and I kind of embracing, which nobody would ever think would happen. And if there's anything that had happened from this throwing back the chair, that's the most memorable time of the whole process that I've had so far. I had to share that with everybody listening.
Oh, that's awesome. And you signed all those chairs and all those books.
We signed all those chairs. Phil Bova, Bobby Knight, of course, February 23rd, 1985. And we had so much fun in those 3 hours exchanging. But he's doing well. Like you said, you brought a good point on that you brought up with to the listeners. 80 years old, and he's doing well. And he still lives in Bloomington. And we're going to be getting together probably within the next month or so.
Well, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I'm really thrilled about that.
Bov, did you ever eject Knight from a game?
That was the only time that I ejected.
Oh, I mean, yeah. Other than the chair game. Sorry about that. Yes.
Other than the chair game.
Right.
We had a number of technical fouls throughout the year, throughout my career of the 30 years, but I never had to eject him. Now in the book, there's several other coaches that are mentioned.
That's what I want to say, Bob, and I don't mean to jump you, but that was my next question. What is your most memorable ejection of a coach in your time as a ref?
Well, we have in the book the top 15 games. We have we talk about the history of the Big Ten. We talk about the support system that my wife gave me. But to get to that area that you talked about, we had 15 top games that were just phenomenal. And I think the readers will really enjoy them because we go into great detail. But of course, we had a situation with John Chady. John, God rest his soul, just passed away.
The late great John Chady.
Oh, he was the best. He would have his practices. For the listeners that don't know this, he would have every morning, Dennis. His practices would start at 5:00 in the morning. So you played for him. You better be out. You better not be out the night before doing your thing. You better be in the rack by 10:00 because you're going to practice till 8:00 every single morning. Now he was in the Atlantic 10. He made Temple what Temple was. It was just he's a Hall of Fame coach, and I had a ball game against a great rivalry, West Virginia and Gail Catlett. Remember the great Gail Catlett?
Yes.
And in my book, I name the great coaches, the Raleigh Massimino, Tommy Ezzos, and I say a paragraph or two about each person, my interaction with them, and some great things. But I have to share with you a classic story with John Chady. We're playing West Virginia, they're at West Virginia for the Atlantic 10 for first place. And it was one of those games, again, like we had in Indiana, Purdue. The ball wouldn't go in the hole. And this assistant coach, I won't go in and mention his name on the podcast, but it's in the book. He is all over us. And I told him very nicely, you better get your act together. We're going to have a problem. Well, sure enough, we have a ball go out of bounds. And sure enough, he comes out at me, the assistant coach, mind you. So now I go over and I give the technical foul sign, Dennis. And in doing so, when I call this technical foul on this assistant coach, John Chady, God bless him, comes flying out at me. And as I go to put the technical foul, he comes up with a hyphenated 12-letter word, and I won't say what that is, but he thought we didn't do what we thought he wanted us to do, and he gave me a blast. So I gave him the technical foul sign. Now I gave the he-ho that he's thrown out of the game, and don't you know I catch his chin. And I knocked him back onto the chair, and they thought I punched him, which I didn't. I accidentally bumped him. Now he gets up. He comes after me. The coaches are grabbing him. We go back and forth, and now we're exchanging, we exchanged some vulgarity to each other, which we shouldn't have. And it's all, you could hear it all on the microphone, and the CBS cast is hearing all this vernaculars going back and forth. So he finally walks off the floor. He says his last words to me, and the game goes on. But the place went crazy. But here's the best part. And I didn't mean to. I just very simply had a technical foul on the assistant. He protected his assistant. He said something he shouldn't have. I ejected him, but in doing so, I hit him in the chin. Monday morning, I'm at school. I've been an educator for over 40 years. The phone rings. It's the commissioner from the Atlantic 10. I says, I'm done. I'm done. I'm fired. He says, Mr. Bova, how are you? I says, good, Commissioner. How are you? I have someone on the phone I want you to talk to. Coach John Chaney. And this is a true story, Dennis. It's a classic. It's in the book. What are the odds of this Hall of Fame coach calling Phil Bova at school with the commissioner, and he apologizes to me, you ready, for his despicable behavior. Now, he sends me a letter. I arrives 3 days after that phone call. It's in this book, Throwing Back the Chair. He apologized. I apologized. But what class on his part, because he could have told the commissioner, look, you tell Bova, blah, 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 and on and on and on. But he said, I was wrong. I'm going to let the referee know I was wrong. He went on to say some very positive things about me, and I in turn to him. And don't you know, 3 weeks later, I have the championship game with Calipari from UMass. You might know good old, Mr. Calipari.
Oh, yeah.
He's a beauty too. And John Chaney Ward Temple with Marcus Camby. And UMass went on to win the game, but everything was put aside. Now that was, you talk about ejections. Under those circumstances, I'll never forget it. And that letter is in my book. And we got along just beautifully afterward. Now the assistant, I don't care for him too much. But the head coach, that's just a class act. God rest his soul.
Bov, when did you retire from refereeing, and what is your best advice for young officials, officials people who either want to be referees or are young in the business and are just learning the ropes? What advice would you give?
Well, to answer your first question, I retired about 12 years ago. And I was asked to become a supervisor and asked to become an observer. And I felt, I paid my dues in the business. I think it was time for other guys to kind of step up. I was away from home quite a bit with being an educator all throughout the school year, and then having baseball camp and then an officials camp. It took, I was fortunate to have, a tremendous amount of support from my wife, Donna. And that she is also has a whole chapter that coincides with your question, Dennis. Number one, what do you need if you're going to go to the next level? If you want to get in from high school to college, it's very demanding. And number one, you have to have a support system. And that's what my wife did with me for all those years. I was 44 years in the Big Ten and in the NCAA. I knew when I was when I was at school and going to ball games, I knew she took good care of the kids, did everything she was supposed to do. I suggest if a guy or a girl is getting into the business, they have to have an understanding spouse, number one. Number two, they got to be able to have a good relationship with their employer, because they're going to be in great demand to be at certain places at certain times. And that's a big challenge, because you're away from your family, number one, and sometimes you're going to miss work, number two. Number three, there's a tremendous amount of abuse that goes on at every level, but the higher you go, the more abuse you're going to be able to take. And that kind of really separates the men from the boys, so to speak, and the women from the girls, our girls from the women. I really think that you have to be able to let it go in one ear and out the other ear, because and people today, they're not willing to take and go through all that abuse because they feel it's not worth it. So therefore, again, it's brought. I share that in throwing back the chair. Officiating today is at an all-time low, because people cannot make that commitment to be all over the country when they have to be, or their support system at home is shaky. Because when it's all said and done, Dennis, you're going to retire and you got to go back to where you started. So you better have a good family relationship and a good understanding with your spouse.
Phil Bova, I cannot thank you enough. Of course, we could do this for 5 hours, but you deserve a rest, and I really appreciate you taking the time tonight to be with us as we tape on Monday night, the 24th of May. I really appreciate everything and our friendship over the years, and continued success with throwing back the chair, and you'll be sure to check in with me when more stories come from that front.
Oh, I sure will. And thank you so much, Dennis, for your time, and my best of luck to you. Continued success to you and your family.
You got it, both.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's Phil Bova, the legendary referee and author of a book that's been out not that long, but by all means, figure out a way to get a copy. Throwing Back the Chair, essentially a memoir of Phil Bova and his days as a referee, and just really a great time with him on the Dennis Manoloff Show, part of the Press Play Podcast Network. All right, we'll talk to you soon.